Well, let me begin by thanking everybody for coming to this panel and all the panelists we have up here who are joining us as well. We're going to be talking about college affordability in the 21st century. And this is a topic that the Center for Innovation and Education has been studying very closely. And we're hoping to make a lot of progress on it, not only on this panel, but throughout the next few years. And to sort of set the stage for this, I just thought I'd kind of describe a few trends that we've seen in higher education over the past few years. So the first kind of trend that we're kind of that's driving a lot of the issues that we're talking about is that tuition has been consistently increasing for decades on end. And so if you look at public two-year tuition, so this is for community colleges, that has increased. It's now up to about $10,000 at the national level, which matches what a four-year college charged back in the 1990s. So if you went to school in the 1990s, you paid about what community college students are paying today, which is kind of shocking. That's a pretty steep increase in kind of prices. Meanwhile, public four-year tuition, so if you're getting a bachelor's degree today, the average cost of that nationwide is about $20,000 if you're going to a public university, upwards of $40,000 if you're going to a private nonprofit. And so we can see that tuition has been increasing very, very rapidly. One of the consequences of that is that student debt is now increasing rapidly as well. So you've probably seen the headlines that student debt is now higher than credit card debt and all these other categories of debt. So each year, the typical student who borrows about $6,500, and the typical parent who borrows $16,000. So not all students and not all parents borrow, but those that do, it's $6,500 for students and $16,000 for parents. So we're talking pretty substantial accumulation of debt here. And if you fast forward a few years, okay, so the student either drops out, graduates, is continuing their education, what happens to those student loans? Well, we've now got about 13.5 million former students who are struggling to repay their debts. And we're defining struggling, meaning they've either defaulted on their student loans, they're in deferment or forbearance, which are kind of the steps leading up to default. And so that's over $400 billion that these students are struggling with. So to help us kind of make sense of a lot of these trends and issues, we've got our three excellent panelists. So we've got Emma Rogers. She is the assistant to the executive director of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, which is a wonderful organization. She attended Southwestern University and graduated in 2018, where she was a swimmer, a young life leader, and an honors student. Next, we'll have Monikor Shortino. She is the director of social innovation at Capital One, where she oversees philanthropy and community strategy. To lead innovation in her community and on behalf of Capital One's Financial Services Division. She previously served as the executive director for the Plano School District Education Foundation, which was a conduit for public-private partnerships for the district's priority projects. And she's been recognized by the Plano Chamber of Commerce, Rising Star Award, the Dallas Business Journal, the 40 Under 40 Award, the DCEO, the 30 Under 30, and the Commercial Real Estate Award, which is making me feel bad about myself. She attended Abilene Christian University and earned a Bachelor of Science degree in social work from the University of North Texas. She has a Master of Science degree in Management and Administrative Science from the University of Texas, but at Dallas. And last but not least, we have Harrison Keller. He is currently the commissioner of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. He was the founder and principal investigator of On-Ramps, which is a dual enrollment initiative that provides college-level courses to high school students across the state of Texas, as well as the Texas On-Course Initiative, which works with Governor Greg Abbott's Tri-State Workforce Initiative to prepare secondary college and career advising across the state. He previously served as the deputy to the president for the strategy and policy, wow, that's a mouthful, and as a professor of practice at the University of Texas at Austin. And he holds a bachelor's degree in philosophy from Notre Dame and a PhD in philosophy from Georgetown University. So welcome me and thanking our panelists for coming. And we're going to lead off with Emma because she's got a very human aspect side to the story. So this is what I do for a living, so I go to a lot of these events, and we very rarely actually hear from students who are dealing with a debt. And Emma is going to give us the student side of things.
It was a really nice way for him to say that I have very little experience in that. But it was much nicer than that. So I graduated from Southwestern University in 2018. I decided to go to Southwestern all the way from Farmington, New Mexico, which was a really weird decision when I graduated, and I didn't realize it was so weird. But in New Mexico, if you graduate with above a 3.0 from your high school and you keep above a 3.0 for your first semester of college, you qualify for what's called the lottery scholarship, which essentially waives your tuition if you go to a state school in New Mexico. So that's what most students do, which made a lot of sense. And I didn't particularly want to move to Albuquerque, and I definitely didn't want to move to Las Cruces. And so I decided that I was going to move to Texas. But that meant that I had to take out loans in order to go to Southwestern. I thought that I did it well. I had much less than $20,000 in loans, which seemed great, until I decided to get married about 5 days after I graduated to someone who had about 3 times the amount of loans that I did. And you can't always plan for that. So it was a really interesting experience to go from 4 years of, okay, I know what I'm doing, I'm getting this degree, and I'm going to work this, and I'm going to pay it all off, and it'll be fine. And then suddenly you're dealing with other people's debt as well, and life plans. It doesn't always go well. But on January 9th of this year, we made the final payment on all of that, and so we paid off all of my debt and all of my husband's debt, which was very exciting, thank you. But it wasn't particularly easy. I live about an hour away from where I work, which is not always fun, but it's way cheaper. So a lot of random corner cutting, I suppose, that made that possible. But yeah, it looked a lot different than we were expecting it to. And the first 2 years of marriage looked a lot different than we were expecting them to because of those decisions. So yeah, that's a very brief introduction to that.
Well, thank you so much, Emma. We'll have lots of questions for you later because I'm still paying off my debt. So I would very much like to know what the magic.
Mine was just undergrad. We'll clarify that.
So Monica, please tell us about Capital One's initiatives.
Yeah, so congratulations, Emma, on graduating and paying off that debt. I know it's not an easy task, and so a huge congratulations, and we're all proud of you, and I hope you are too. So at Capital One, I oversee our corporate philanthropy work, and a lot of the partnerships that we are looking at are really around how do you build kind of this future workforce, and how are you investing in communities to make them thriving communities. And education is a huge component of that, and access to education is also a huge component of that. And so a lot of the partnerships that we're investing in are kind of public-private partnerships in the education space. So I wanted to talk just briefly about some of those public-private partnerships that we've partnered with that are really showing promise, especially as you think about affordability and college tuition and that sort of thing. I'm from Dallas, as Andrew mentioned, so a few of my examples will be from Dallas. But also, Dr. Keller, the program that they mentioned in his is really around that dual credit piece. And in Dallas, our early college high schools are really showing huge promise in the space of college affordability and access to colleges. So in our current programs, we have over 3,000 students who have graduated through those programs. And right now, currently in Dallas, less than 30% of our students are having post-secondary and or certifications once they graduate. But thanks to the early college programs, by 2021, Dallas ISD is estimating that number will be actually students graduating with 2-year degrees. So you think about the impact that is making on students and the affordability of college. They're graduating high school with their 2-year degrees. It's making a huge impact in that space. The other programs that I wanted to mention a little bit that we have partnered with is really early exposure to students as well. So programs like NAF, which is a national program, but they have several campuses in Dallas, really is doing early exposure to career and workforce. So what we also see in affordability in college is a lot of students changing majors multiple times. By getting on that early exposure to what workforce looks like, what are those degree plans, we are seeing more students understanding what they're getting into. And as part of that, NAF also does paid high school internships. So not only are they getting the classes, they're getting on campuses to understand firsthand, like, what does technology look like, and that sort of thing. So love the programs that they are delivering. And the other piece that I would say from a high school early piece from public-private partnerships is really around the Dallas County Promise. The County Promise program is across the nation, but it's helping students with their first 2 years of tuition. It's leveraging Pell Grants to do that, but in Dallas alone, we brought in $3 million more in Pell Grants just by giving students, helping them fill out their FAFSA forms, working with the community colleges to get these students enrolled in community colleges. The corporations in the industry are coming around these students with mentorships and getting them access to different programs. So seeing not only upped enrollment in the community colleges with free tuition, Pell Grant tuition. Also, the retention numbers have gone up substantially, because that's another problem we see. You enter college, you need to finish college. So what are some of those programs that are showing promise of getting these students to the finish line? And the last piece that I would just touch on briefly is a post-secondary program. In Dallas, there's a university, a college, Paul Quinn College, a small college there, and they are the first urban work college. And what that is all students are being put into the workforce. So corporations throughout the Metroplex are hiring these students along with the college. And it's lowered, they've been able to lower tuition by $10,000, which is substantial. And it's also getting that exposure to students to be able to see what are the workforce, what are these workforce readiness skills, because the other piece on that, when they graduate, we want them to be job ready. We want them to go get a job so they can pay down that debt or do their next step. So excited about a lot of the innovative programs, so that how do we problem solve? And I love that the state is problem solving in a lot of really creative, innovative ways.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Harrison, please tell us about what Texas has been doing.
Yeah, so first, I've been on the job now for just a little over 100 days. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm a sixth generation Texan. Grew up in the Panhandle. Both my parents are school teachers. I went to school outside of the state, but my community is what on the public school side we call property poor. And so my own transition from high school to college sort of stuck with me, and that's why you mentioned some of the work that I've done on transitions from secondary to post-secondary. Actually, with a lot of folks in this room, Texas has really been a pioneer on building new kinds of pathways and partnerships from high schools to colleges. So along the way, I got to work in the legislature and as a university administrator, and so there are pieces of this that I've had the opportunity to think about and work on for the last 20 years, and then there's pieces of this I found out about on Tuesday in my new job. So here's just some initial comments. Is that first? So Texas had set some pretty ambitious goals in what we call the 60 by 30 Texas plan in 2015. And so we've been with that for a few years, and so one of the things that I've been talking about is that it may be time for us to revisit and update some of these goals, and in particular, one of the ways that the conversation's shifting, I think, in a very positive direction, is there are a lot of conversations about the value of different kinds of credentials. So look, we could just make up a credential and say, okay, let's have every Texas student, when they get 15 hours, they're going to get some made-up credential, and then we'd say, look at the progress we're making on 60 by 30 Texas. and it would do nothing for our competitiveness as a state, right? So it can't just be we're going to get 60% of our young working population to any kind of post-secondary qualification. We need to have a more focused conversation about what are the credentials of value, and what are those credentials of value for the individual students, and also important for our communities, important for the state. So I did want to say I commend Texas Public Policy Foundation for the excellent work that you all have done on earnings and debt and making that kind of information more visible. I think we need a lot more of that kind of work and bringing that into student advising. So now let me say this, that here's one of the things keeping me up at night is at the same time that, like, from a policy perspective, and as I'm talking about this stuff, a lot of folks are nodding and you're looking at all the same data I'm looking at and probably reading the same articles. So it's absolutely clear in the data that a lot of the future competitiveness of Texas is going to hinge on how well we can unlock the Texas talent, right? And so having education beyond high school is vital for employability, for workforce participation. It's absolutely clear in the data. And if anything, what we've seen in the wake of the Great Recession is it's become more and more important. So the vast majority of the net new jobs in Texas and across the nation have gone to folks that have at least some education. It could be a certificate or associate's degree, but at least some education beyond high school. Now, at the same time, what we're seeing is an incredible drop in public confidence in higher education. So a friend of mine used to be at Gallup, Brandon Bastide, I think he's spoken at some of the kind of, I think was at a TPBF event. But anyway, so Brandon told me that it was the fastest drop that they've seen in any of the issues that they've tracked in the Gallup survey since they've been tracking it. So they saw in 2013, 70% of the adult respondents said that higher education was very important. And in the last survey that came back in December, only 50%. So only half of the adults who were surveyed said that education beyond high school would be very important. And so there's this deep tension there between what we're seeing in the data about our economy and our workforce and what we see happening in workforce participation and what's happening in public opinion. So I think that one of our big challenges right now is going to be figuring out, well, how do we navigate that, and how do we make more visible where the education beyond high school really can make an incredible difference for students? How do we make sure that we streamline that pathway, reaching all the way back into high schools? We've already done some amazing work on that we need to take to even greater scale, and bringing into the advising of the students the kind of data that I mentioned about what the value is of credentials over time.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative and ask a couple questions. So Emma, we'll lead off with you. I must say I was a little disappointed because as somebody who's repaying their loans, I was hoping for like a magic bullet, and what I heard was hard work and sacrifice other priorities, and that doesn't sound fun. But I am very intrigued by this willingness to take on debt to kind of invest in your future self, but this almost hostile attitude to it as soon as you graduated, and to try and get rid of it right away. So can you walk me through, were you always that hostile when you were taking this on, or did you graduate and you're like, oh my God, I owe $20,000? That?
No, when I was looking at colleges, I wanted to go to a small school, and I wanted to go to a private liberal arts school, and I had all of these goals, and the sticker price didn't really come into my head much. I was very, very lucky that my parents were able to help me out quite a bit. I mean, the fact that I was able to go to Southwestern with less than $20,000 in loans in my name was very impressive. And so with that, it was like, oh, okay, that doesn't sound like that much in the grand scheme of things when you're looking at the tuition price at Southwestern, right? So in my mind, it was a value. And then I graduated, and we were looking around and adding up my debt and Tanner's debt, and oh, this is a lot more than I bargained for. And we both pretty immediately realized how hostile we were to debt and said, that's got to change. But going into college, I think there was this expectation that, one, if I take 10 years to pay it back, that's pretty normal and that's fine, and I'll at least be able to make the monthly payments. And if not, maybe I'll get a job in, some government agency that does loan repayments or some other options. And then we'll see. So as an 18-year-old, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. I hardly really knew what I was getting myself into when I graduated, but we tried, so.
Well, you paid it off in 2 years, right?
Yeah, so we paid off all of my stuff in 2 years, and then Tanner graduated a year before me. So he had started paying down his before we got married, but I'm bulking it all together because it still kind of affected our life. So I think when all was said and done, it was like $75,000 all paid off in 3 years.
That's impressive.
So.
Well, that is impressive.
It's fun.
So Monica, let me ask you a little bit about internships. So for those of us who haven't done internships, there's sort of like this mysterious object out there that we know exists, but we don't really know anything about. Can you sort of walk us through like the evolution of internships? Like what distinguishes good internships from bad, and what have you seen as you've seen internships evolve over the years?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think internships serve two purposes. One, the student gets access to the company and gets to learn more about the company, but the company also gets to learn more about the talent as well. So it's kind of win-win. You talked a little bit around the evolution of internships. In Texas, Dr. Keller talked a little bit about this talent. That's how we will succeed in the future. Talent is hard in Texas. We have great talent, but we also have great companies wanting to hire. So internships are a great opportunity for those students to get access to our company and learn more about our culture and learn more about what we have to offer as a company. So within our internship program, some of that evolution really was around, as talent has gotten tighter and tighter in that market, going down into the pipeline earlier and earlier has been really a huge change for us in our internship space. So for example, over the last 5 years, now we do high school internship programs. So we pay students, it's a paid internship program. They come on our campus from 4 to 8 weeks and do real work within our company. They work alongside our different departments, either within our finance team to build out, different cash flow projections and different things that they'll need to know when they get to be employed full time, but it's also giving them exposure to what that looks like. It's also giving our associates exposure to what this up and coming workforce looks like, and some of those talents. So we're building the talent in our backyard as well as, recruiting talent where we need to get it. And internships is a great space to do that. The other place that I would say as you think about college internships and some of those evolutions, again, going earlier in the pipeline, we would generally our college interns would be juniors and seniors getting ready to enter the workforce pretty soon. We're finding more of them already have offers. So we're going earlier in that pipeline as well. And also getting them earlier in the pipeline also gets them into specific industries that we need. So for example, tech talent is really a challenge to find great tech talent. We need more people in those fields. And so going earlier in the pipeline, we can say, these are the jobs we're hiring for. We will hire you as soon as you graduate. Go this direction. So kind of that earlier in the pipeline is a huge adjustment for us in the internship space. The other space I would say is we're offering more and more tracks within the internship program. So where we would traditionally do, finance and business, analysts, that sort of thing. Now we have a tech track, we have an HR track, that sort of thing. So giving that early exposure and internships a wide variety. And the great thing about like the high school internship and the college internship is they're earning real money towards things like paying college tuition. So it's, I think, a great opportunity on both sides in the internship space.
And Harrison, I understand you've only been on the job 100 days.
Yeah, so that's most we got it figured out.
Yeah. But so looking back, like prior to your taking your position, what do you think have been the most impressive changes you've seen in Texas higher education? And what do you think are the kind of the biggest missed opportunities or maybe even mistakes?
Interesting. So some of the things that have been most impressive. So there's been an explosion in the dual credit and dual enrollment. And so we probably have something right now on the order of about 250,000 Texas high school students who are enrolled in colleges or universities while they're still in high school. And when I first started working on some of these issues in like 98, 99, we had fewer than 10,000 students that were doing that. So that's a dramatic change in the way that students go to college. Another thing we see is students from the dual credit, from AP, also the students will be co-enrolled at multiple institutions. They're enrolled in online courses. That's much more sort of cafeteria style. Like when I went to college, I arrived on campus. 4 years later, I had a degree with one major and all my credits came from one institution, and that's just not how Texas kids go to school anymore. Now, in generally, I will say this, although a lot of this has been fueled by policy, our policy context hasn't really caught up. And so there's some tensions where a lot of the ways that we resource institutions and hold them accountable, the way that we publish data about graduation rates, that kind of thing, it doesn't really account for the ways that Texas kids go to college now. So that's been a dramatic change in a generation. I would say there's also a missed opportunity there, and I think there's where I would like to see us going is much more in the direction of earlier engagement with these students. So still, the transition from, it doesn't matter where you are on the income spectrum, the transition from high school to college is pretty much terrible. And so, I mean, just think of anyone that you know who's going through this. It's incredibly stressful, and I think sort of disturbingly so. There's disincentives for students to participate, especially first-generation students that don't have their parents saying, you know, I went through this, you can get through it. But also for some of our most competitive Texas students, like here's something nobody's talking about. Okay, New England and Mid-Atlantic states and the Midwestern states are losing high school population. So they have a surplus of higher education. Where are they going for students? Coming to Texas. You know, the SEC schools are giving big scholarships to Texas students that essentially allow them to pay what a full pay in-state student would pay. Everybody loves Texas students. So just like in Greater Houston, there are more than 100 non-Texas institutions with recruiting offices. And so this is something that we need to start paying attention to a little more, is how do we keep our top Texas talent in Texas? And honestly, I think the path is going to be a lot along the lines of what our corporations have figured out, and frankly, we figured out in athletics a long time ago, is that you identify that talent earlier in the pipeline. And I think there's no area in education policy more ripe for disruption than that transition from secondary to post-secondary. So we think it's perfectly normal if a star athlete already knows where they're going to college and what they're going to pay when they're juniors. But then, you know, if a kid is a computer scientist, we're like, oh, how would we ever find that student? You know, and we wait until the same time everybody else is coming after that student to give them their admission letter and their financial aid package and that kind of thing. So I think there's a missed opportunity there, but that we've laid groundwork to do some really important and innovative work in the future. And let me just put a plug in there also that another thing that's going to be really important for higher education in Texas in the next several years is the implementation of House Bill 3. So the legislature just passed historic, sweeping public school finance and education reform legislation without a gun to their head from the court that includes all these sections with incentives for college and career and military readiness. for incentives for school districts to be involved in new partnerships. We're going to pay closer attention to this. There's funding for students to take the SAT or ACT or the TSIA, that's our Texas test for whether you have to be in developmental ed or not. While they're still in high school, our Texas students are going to be taking the FAFSA test earlier, so more of these students are going to discover, oh, there is a path where college could be affordable for me. This is going to be huge for what's possible for Texas higher education going forward.
Oh, great, thank you. One more question for Emma. So there are a lot of people running for president right now who want to forgive a lot of student debt. So as somebody who's worked very hard to pay off their student debt, how would that make you feel?
Excuse me. On a very selfish personal level, don't love it because it's oh, what about me? I did all of these things. On a much more empathetic level, I have a friend that I went to Southwestern with who she got married the December after she graduated, and she and her husband made lots of life decisions about where they were going to live and the quality of life they were going to have based on the debt that they knew that they had. And about 3 months into their marriage, she was getting calls from this other loan company saying, hey, you're really late on your loans. Why aren't you paying them back? And what had happened was that her parents had her social security number and her name. And instead of taking more out in their name for her to go to Southwestern, they took out a second loan in her name and kind of forgot to tell her about it. So they made all of these decisions based on the debt that they knew that they had when they got married. And then suddenly there was another $30,000 that they didn't know. And that definitely changed a lot of aspects of their life. And I think when you hear stories like that, it's oh man, I don't like that for you because you didn't make that decision. I signed the dotted line when I took out my debt. And so I knew what I was getting myself into, at least vaguely. I kind of knew I had to pay it off, even if I didn't totally understand the ramifications of it. But when you're talking to people who, their parents have all of that information on them and they can do it pretty easily. And I'm sure it doesn't happen often, but it happens. It's oh, are there ways in which something can be done for that? And I don't know the answer there. And so that makes me feel a little bit more empathetic to the idea of student loan forgiveness. I still don't like it. I think most people know what they're getting themselves into-ish when they're signing the dotted line saying, yeah, I want to take out this money so that I can go to this school for this reason. But to go also a little bit back to your first question for me, one of the things about paying off student loan debt for us that was really important that I think is often overlooked is the community that we had, in that we're close with our parents and we have a church that we go to that we're really plugged into. And so the fact that when we made the last payment on all of our student loans, we basically had no savings. It wasn't terrifying because if the world fell apart and everything crashed down, we had this safety net behind us where it's okay, I don't really want to go back and live in New Mexico with my parents, but if we absolutely had to, we knew we'd be able to. And so we were able to make these risk determinations in saying, oh, we can do this, even though it's a little bit stressful, because we know that we can fall back on other things. And I think there's a lot of folks, if they don't have a family that they're really close to, or a church that they're plugged into, or any sort of community in which they can say, if the world ends, I have a backup plan, or I have a safety net. It's a lot harder to make the decisions to sacrifice really heavily and pay off their debt. And it looks a lot different, I think. And so on a very human level, I understand the idea of wanting to give someone an out for that. On a really practical level, most of us knew what we were getting into, especially when you're talking to people who went to a small liberal arts private school. Not to be super blasé, but what did you expect, right? When you get your first bill, you kind of had to have seen that coming. So, yes, and.
No, it's a nice gray answer, which you don't often get. Everybody seems to approach it from a very black and white issue, so I really appreciate that. So Monica, we've got a lot of people in the business community in the audience. What's some advice you would have for them about how they can get involved to either make college more affordable for students who are going, or to increase access for students who just think it's too unaffordable to go at all?
Yeah. So I think my biggest advice for the business community is get involved and start having conversations. It doesn't cost anything. It doesn't. It just takes a bit of your time. So know who your university partnerships are. Universities are in your area. Know who your school districts are in your area. Because the best thing you can do as a business partner is help them understand what the jobs are when these students graduate. And so that would be my biggest advice, is get involved in those conversations. And if you want to take it a step further, there are so many opportunities and so many programs that are doing really incredible, innovative work. There are so many students in need as well. And just giving them that exposure to what jobs are out there, what kind of schooling that requires. You talked about the Gallup's poll and kind of that rating piece. And J.P. Morgan Chase did a recent study in Dallas. 65% of the jobs require either a degree or a accreditation or certification of sorts. That they need jobs, so they need that information, so they need those conversations to start happening. So that would be my biggest advice, is be a part of the conversation. You're a huge component of that conversation. And then if you want to take it a step further, find a kid in need or a program in need and lend your expertise to those programs, because I think you'll make a world of difference, and it will only cost you a little bit to be able to do some of those things.
Great, thank you. And my last question before I open it up to the floor here is for Harrison. So you mentioned the tool that TPPF created and we released last week. And so what this tool does is it allows students, parents, policymakers to look up earnings and debt by college and program. So this is the first time this data has ever been available. The Department of Education just released it back in November. And so this is the first time we're really getting a clear look at how, say, a chemistry major's earnings and debt differs from an accounting major's earnings and debt. And so we're working on a ton of follow-up projects on this web tool. And one of them is a state ranking of which states are doing the best job, which state higher education systems are doing the best job of preparing their students, meaning their students are going to programs that have high earnings relative to debt. And I've got good news. Texas is in the top 10, but I've got bad news. We're not number 1. And I've got another piece of bad news, which is that there's a certain state on the Pacific coast that is beating us. So my question to you is, what can we do to not only beat that state, but actually get to number 1?
Yeah. So that's an excellent question, and I think first of all, paying more attention to this kind of data is enormously powerful for students, families, counselors. There's like some institutions, so the UT system made some of this kind of data available, but to have this kind of data available for all the programs across all the institutions is enormously powerful and important. And also to be willing to do it not just for Texas, but you're able to make those national comparisons. That's really terrific information for folks to be able to have, because when you make the decision, should I be a psychology major or should I be an economics major, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars of difference in your projected lifetime earnings on average. And that doesn't mean you don't end up being a psychology major, but you just need to make a more informed decision. And so resources like this are really important. So first of all, look, the biggest cost of college is not tuition, especially if you're at a public college or university. The biggest driver of student debt, by the way, has not even been tuition increases in recent years. It's been more on the cost of living side and the rents, and especially if you're in Austin, that kind of thing. It's been pretty difficult for students. The biggest cost of college is the time they spend out of the workforce. So the most important thing that we can do from an affordability standpoint and to help reduce student debt is to get students through more efficiently. we need more streamlined pathways to get to these high value, high quality credentials. So a couple of things about that. So one of the mistakes actually that students sometimes make is they say, well, I'm going to go, I'm only going to take 9 hours or 12 hours, and then I'm going to work a little more so that I can reduce my costs for the short term. A lot of times they're much better off just getting done, just getting through, getting done more efficiently. Fortunately, this is getting more attention within higher education institutions than it was when I went to college. When I went to college, it was much more you're sort of on your own to navigate it at most institutions. And now we have more institutions are paying attention to students' progress towards degree, making sure students stay on track. And that's an important step in the right direction. So these kinds of paid internships can be really powerful. I'd say they're even more powerful when you give students credit towards their degree programs. So then you get the two-for of students actually making progress, and they're getting exposure to skills that are directly relevant to job opportunities, and they're not losing time. So I think that's the most important thing we can do is that we can get our Texas students through more efficiently. We can streamline those pathways to high quality credentials. The second most important thing we can do is, I think, take this kind of rich data and feed it more deliberately into our advising and into the design of programs so that students are going to be able to make informed choices and to transition more seamlessly into the workforce.
All right, well, thank you so much. Let me go ahead and open it up to the audience for questions. The gentleman right up here in red.
Okay, the title of your program here is Affording College in the 21st Century. I don't think it is. I don't think it is affordable. Do you know the history? In 2003, they had what they call Orange and Maroon Day. That's the former students from Texas A&M and the former students from the University of Texas. They come up here and they lobby the legislature. And what we were advised to do by our former students associations is you need to lobby to deregulate tuition. And what they were asking, and we did, we followed, and they got it passed. But what we did, we transferred the checkbook, who controlled the checkbook for tuition for these two great universities from the state of Texas, the taxpayers, to the students. What they did not tell us that they were going to escalate the tuition tremendously. So I made a mistake. I think we made a mistake. And I think we should take a look as policy people, myself and with you and your organization, take a look at controlling these costs. These are two state universities, so they have a responsibility. Take a look at maybe regulating the tuition, because we gave A&M, University of Texas, a blank check. That's what we did, and it is now basically unaffordable. When I went to school, it was $25 a semester. The oil fields of Texas, the University of Texas, and A&M were benefited for that. So they basically paid for our education. That's a great deal for the great people of Texas. So let's take a look at about using some of those funds to bring down these tuition and yes, make college affordable. So what I'm asking you as a policy think tank, would you help us advocate for this? This is a problem. This is a problem in education, in higher education. So take a look at this, advocating for us to get this back under control. I have an idea to bring it back, roll it back. Let the legislature rein some of these people in. That's my question.
Well, Harrison, I think you're the natural selection for this, but I'd love to address some of that as well.
Yeah. So a couple of things on tuition deregulation. So there is this. So in 2003, and still this major debate on who should pay for the cost of higher education. And a couple decades ago, the state of Texas paid the vast share of the costs of higher education. Now the state of Texas would pay for someplace like UT and A&M, the state of Texas would pay about a third on average of the cost. And so what essentially happened is that more of the cost of education were shifted to students and their families. And that was a deliberate policy decision at the time because we were in a tough budget year. They were slashing budgets, but the concern was what would be the impact if the state pulled back even further of the colleges and universities. So I'd say a couple of things. First is that we have seen so we saw tuition go up quickly for a few years and then level off. So now that we're seeing these latest rounds of tuition increases, especially because of some important policy leadership from Governor Abbott, under 3%. And so it's leveled off and become a lot more predictable. Lieutenant Governor Patrick has also been very visible on this issue, saying, well, you don't actually have a blank check because you're accountable to the legislature. And I think that's been effective in holding down the costs on the tuition side. Now, the other thing that is really interesting that there's just some new data coming out about. So there's this in the presidential campaigns that we talked about. There's a lot of discussion of should we just go to free college, vacate the student loans, but also should we just have free college, right, as an entitlement. And there was a time where public colleges and universities were essentially free. So Texas sort of went the other way on that, where we haven't created big entitlements at the state level for free college, but the legislature also prioritized need-based aid. And so over time, what we've seen is actually, there was a lot of concern, are we going to see fewer poor students be able to attend our public colleges and universities? And we actually didn't see that happen. What we saw is it increased slightly. And the other thing that we've seen that's really that's intriguing from a policy standpoint and thinking about it, especially from a conservative policy standpoint, is we saw a shift in the kinds of majors that the students were choosing more towards the kind of majors with higher projected lifetime earnings. And that's without the benefit of the kind of data that TPPF is exercising the leadership to make more visible. So we saw students attending, but making a little different choices about what they were studying. We've also, at least at the flagship universities, we've seen the students get through more efficiently. So I think the stage is set in Texas where absolutely we need to have this conversation. I'd argue that not just about affordability, but about the predictability of those costs and the predictability of how much financial aid students are going to be able to count on. But the stage is really set for a different kind of policy conversation in Texas than we see in the presidential campaigns. So it's so that it looks like, and actually some of the discussions among the economists has been, is there a different model in Texas that suggests a different way that you could go as a state to address some of these issues that's different from the sort of massive entitlement free college kind of direction.
Gentleman in the back.
My name is Bernie Francis, and I spent a lot of time in the jail, 7 to 10 years in the jail of the Texas Education Reform Movement, and I've chaired a couple university post-secondary education boards of regents here in Texas, and so on and so forth. A couple of my best ideas are competency-paced K-12 using the power of today's online technology. Okay, I don't think that the motivated students need to sit in a classroom for 6 or 7 hours a day to get through K-12. So that's one of my ideas. The other one is, instead of Well, the state legislature entered a partnership with WGU, Western Governors University, and I'd like to see that go from a partnership to maybe some state funding, because they do an excellent job of helping students get through the university curricula, and as fast as they want to go. It's competency paced as well. I also, I have a technology background, and I'm also 100% convinced that a motivated professor today can build a syllabus from web content. We could unburden students from the cost of buying books. I am 100% convinced that there's nothing in a book that you can't find online, okay? And let's see, and my last comment is, I did chair the Board of Regents for the Texas State Technical College, the most exciting post-secondary school in Texas, in my opinion. And we need to do a better job of convincing our high school students that you don't need to put your butt in a seat for 4 years on a journey to earning $50,000 a year, okay? So those are my comments.
Would any of you like to respond?
I can. If that's helpful. So, Bernie, it's good to see you. So let me just take on like a small chunk of, you write a dissertation off of the different topics that you're talking about. So first of all, in general, I think you're touching on several points that really would be good to underline. First of all, on the, like traditional modes of delivery, traditional academic calendars, generally the way we fund, regulate, and deliver education is mostly organized the way it was organized in the 19th century, And we've noticed, like, for example, even at Texas A&M, the students aren't going home in the summer to work in the fields, but we're still on these traditional agrarian calendars, and think about like the semester as being, semester's 15 weeks long, and a lot of it is still the kind of face-to-face auditoriums and that kind of thing. And I think you're right that one of the things that's going to be important if we're going to educate more Texans to higher standards than we've ever done before, that we have to leverage the power of technology. We have to allow a lot more room for innovation and modes of delivery. I would honestly argue the state shouldn't care as much about mode of delivery and whether you have a 12th day class enrollment. The state needs an educated workforce. So if you can do that with competency-based education, prior learning assessment, credit by exam, transfer credits, we shouldn't care. So I do think that we need to push our policy context in a direction where it's going to accommodate that. So the coordinating board has now there are about 10 competency-based education programs at public colleges and universities that have been developed as part of the Affordable Baccalaureate program, but it's still nascent and not nearly at the scale that I think you envision, Bernie. The second piece that I want to call out that's really important is on the cost of instructional materials. The cost of textbooks is out of control. I'd argue the cost of scholarly publications is also out of control. And so that's definitely something that you can address with a lot of free, adaptable content. So the legislature did put a little bit of money into open educational resources and to stand up a repository to make these kinds of free resources more readily available, searchable for faculty members. So there's those kinds of strategies. There's other kinds of things that we can do just through the purchasing power, because it's Texas, to negotiate better contracts with the publishers to be able to get the costs down for the institutions and the students.
All these great, better ideas. What's in the way?
No, so there are things underway on all of these. I think the thing is that we've got lots of pockets of innovation, and we're not doing it at a Texas scale. So, but like on the OER thing, that was just this last session. There was some funding for OER repository that was appropriated, and so we're just now putting there's an RFP that's going out to work on the OER repository. There are some large scale projects, I'd say, that Rice University is doing through the OpenStax initiative. So like in our on-ramps initiative that some of y'all here, Marion in particular, has really been instrumental in the scaling of that. We've got nearly 50,000 students across the state of Texas, high school students that are taking UT Austin courses. None of them are paying for instructional materials. It's all was created for that purpose, or they're using open educational resources. So we do have some examples, but we need to go faster and farther with all of that, because we do see a ton of students who they won't buy the book for the course. So, they're scraping the money together for tuition, and then they don't buy the book, and then they don't do as well in the course, and then that slows them down. And then, so there's these little short-term decisions about, well, I'm going to save $200 by not buying the math book, then actually has long-term implications.
And just real quick, two other kind of impediments in the way are just the regulatory environment hasn't caught up to a lot of the competency-based. So a couple years ago, the Government Accountability Office actually tried to claw back a lot of financial aid money from Western Governors University, which is insane to everybody in the sector because they're doing great work, and yet it violated the letter of the law. And fortunately, the Secretary was able to intervene and reverse that, but that might have been a different answer if Western Governors was, say, a for-profit and there was a different administration. And so the regulatory apparatus, I think, is kind of in the way in a lot of times. And then another obstacle is just inertia. So I also teach economics, and I've been using the same book for 10 years now. Not because I've evaluated every new book that's come out. It's just, this is what I used last time. I've got a lot of course material that's already based on this. All my lectures are kind of geared towards supplementing the book. And so the existence of these OpenStax is crucial, because the next time I start teaching a new class, then I'll look for OpenStax. But I'm not going through OpenStax when I totally forgot to write the syllabus until like 2 nights before the class starts. So
there's a lot of good free econ stuff.
Yeah. Ma'am, right up front here.
Okay, so I have like 6 or 7 questions I wrote down just off the top of my head. But I'm a homeschool mom of 10 kids. There's no way mom and dad are paying for college tuition for all 10 kids. In fact, we don't even pay for their cars or their phones or anything else. Okay, so they're all on their own. They know this, right? So I have some that are trying to work in high school. And like I have a 15-year-old son right now who went to every single company in town trying to get hired on, internship, offered free labor, you bet. I mean, tried everything, right? They won't touch him until he's at least 16 because of federal workforce, whatever it is. And I'm going, okay, so we're complaining that our kids are delaying adulthood longer and longer, and yet we have all these barriers to entry in place that won't let you hire a motivated kid, where there's no reason why I want him working, because that burns up energy. He's not messing with mom. Okay. So at the end of the day, we have those kind of barriers of entry. Then we're all talking about how college tuition is unaffordable and how we have this huge confidence rate that's gone down and this talk of needing trades, okay? So one of the things we've seen, for instance, my kids do 4-H, they do a lot of stock shows, competitions. None of those scholarships can go toward a trade program. All of them are only good for a 4-year college, accredited college. So that means they can't go to a little private Christian school because it's a lot of times not accredited. So I think we need to make that money more portable. So anyone out there who's at some of these stock show committees, scholarship committees, we need to be encouraging the flexibility of that scholarship money towards some of those 2- and 4-year, not necessarily 4-year, but like a 2-year trade program or something like that. And so I wanted to ask you, why are we not doing a focus? I know I'm trying to think of his name, but it was the former Texas Workforce Commission chair, Tom Hawken. He made some transformative legislation go through that was trying to push that more on our high school level. Why aren't we doing that? Why can't we get more workforce readiness? There's a lot of these degrees out there, as you've just mentioned, that are worthless. They're not worth the $100,000 you pay to get them, and you're not going to be paid a career salary that's even commensurate with that kind of money that you've invested in it. You may as well just buy your kid a house. They'd be better off. So I think there's a lot of degrees that don't need to have degrees, and yet you said 65% in Dallas say that you have to have a degree. So I have one that's trying to do online distance learning. I have another one that's trying to work her way up, and her big thing is you apply for anything. They all say you have to have a college degree. She doesn't want to go to college. She doesn't want to have the debt, and she's not interested in that. She's a creative, really awesome interior designer, but she's like, why do I have to go to college for 4 years when if I either have the talent or I don't? And why won't anyone train me if that's what they want? They don't offer training programs. They want you like ready to go when you walk in the door. So from a mom perspective, when I see my kids struggling through all this, I have another one that's in college and one that's about to go to college, both full scholarship. So, I mean, there's all these different ways I can educate my kids, but every one of them has gone through hoop after hoop after hoop, trying to figure out their way in the world. And then, of course, technology is changing everything as faster than any of us can, catch up. So I guess one thing is, how can we make that scholarship money more flexible? What are the incentives for the trade programs, and how does, like a homeschool mom, for instance, even get access to those programs while they're still in high school? And I think that we need to have companies get real and say, you don't need to necessarily have a degree for 65% of the jobs out there. Maybe it's just you train them for a year or two and have some kind of internship program where it's paid internship and then you work your way into a job, but not pay $100,000 for a worthless degree. So there's a question in there somewhere, but anyway, if y'all could comment, that'd be great.
I will give a brief comment in that space. I would say I think a lot of companies and kind of workforce development people are having conversation around degree inflation. Like, are all the jobs that we've posted really require a degree? And if so, why? And that sort of thing. I think the challenges companies have is they have certain competencies that they expect someone coming in on, and a 4-year degree, you understand what that is. Otherwise, you don't know what they're coming in with. So I think it is a learning curve also for companies to understand, like, to your point, like we do, for us, we partner with programs like Year Up and others who are doing just that. They'll do kind of a training program, they'll intern with us, and then you kind of learn what skill set and competencies those students are coming out with to be able to hire them. But it's a much smaller scale than the university system, which we know what we're getting out of a 4-year, what that student looks like. So I think there are conversations happening. They're slow. I wish I could say the tide would change overnight. It won't. But I think a lot of those conversations are happening, and I think it's a worthwhile discussion. The other piece on your scholarship piece, everybody, all those entities are different, and it's hard because they're all regulated by different boards and they've all set out different criteria. But I think elevating that conversation around the importance of trade jobs and that there are other opportunities will allow them to have different conversations. We have concentrated so much on 4-year pathways, and those are excellent pathways, but there are other pathways, and we got to be able to elevate that conversation with our legislators, with our communities, with all of those sorts of things. A lot of the community colleges have great trade programs, so for your high school student, I would encourage looking into some of those trade school within your community college.
One of the other things I'd throw in there as a parent, I think two of the best tools right now that I'd recommend would be the Center for Education and the Workforce at Georgetown University has a really nice initial tool on calculating the ROI by a different institution, and they're soon going to have at the program level more information. So that would be one tool. The other one would be the new TPVF tool. I think is excellent.
It's on our website.
Yeah, it's just it's on the website, and they've done a great job of giving information about sort of the cost and debt and that kind of thing. Because what I would recommend is, especially when you're trying to advise, whenever I talk to teenagers and that kind of thing. So thinking about what I know about my adolescent son, and what we know about about brain development, the way your brain is still developing until you're about 25, and so sometimes we need to give them a little prefrontal cortex assist, right? And so they're not really good at thinking about sort of that longer term value. And so if we can shift, I think if we can help our students shift the conversation from thinking about, it's not just sticker price or a follow your passion and that kind of thing, but it's really trying to shift the conversation in terms of what you were alluding to is thinking about the value of different kinds of credentials and trying to match up the students' interests, their vocations with credentials that are really going to translate into value. So, you know, an MIT degree is really expensive, and boy does it pay off over time, right? So you know, we need to try to help students see that, you know, it's not as simple as, you know, what's the cheapest program in town. And I think that's why these kinds of tools are so powerful, is they illustrate, you know, here's what the earnings look like and here's what debt looks like, and try to connect that to these conversations about what students are interested in studying.
Real quick before we move on, you also mentioned portability. When you look at the federal level, financial aid is already portable. The student can take it to any school. But at the state level, a lot of state governments will provide funding directly to the institution. So what are your thoughts on making state funding for schools more like federal funding where it follows the student?
So I mentioned before, I mean, I think that in the conversations about higher education affordability, I think that a lot of the issues are about predictability as much as they're about affordability. I mean, look, I've been working this stuff for decades. I'm the commissioner of higher education. I have no idea what college is going to cost for my kids. So, you know, so if we can make the cost of college a little more predictable, and what was important in the early 70s about the advent of the Pell Grant program, it was the Nixon administration that really pushed for the idea that these should be portable, is to give students, give them a little more predictability, give them a little more certainty about what the value of that scholarship would be. So as they're thinking about different colleges, then you know that they've got a little better idea of what that might mean for them. So I think you're right to flag that as an issue that now is probably ripe for Texas and other states to consider, is how can we make the cost of college not just affordable but also more predictable for our students.
Gentleman up here.
Thank you. It's two. The first one, affordability. We're all talking one end in terms of paying. I'm going to take a step back and explain. I'm a graduate of the University of Michigan. Michigan will say they're the finest public university in the world and have been for 100 years. Everybody knows Michigan's kind of arrogant. Okay, that's life. But now let me come back to it. Since I graduated, pardon? Say again? But since I graduated in 1970, they have more than doubled the employees at the University of Michigan who are technically academic. There are less professors in the classroom today in terms of hours than there were in 1970. So now it's not been a large student enrollment increase. The simple fact is they have doubled the number of employees and decreased the number of faculty, tenured faculty, in the classroom. Sometimes from about affordability, you should ask, where the hell is the money going? An example, Michigan just started a program last year. The president of the university, he's a fine gentleman to call him a communist is an understatement. He now has just hired, I think it was roughly 100, I think it was 97 political correctness police. Average salary of $80-some thousand a year. Okay, that's roughly 100 new employees, $8 to $9 million of expenses, all political whatever. It has nothing to do with getting a damn education. Somebody's got to start asking questions about where the money is going. Michigan is now up to 7,000 degrees, and half of them are in gender studies and art history and all these really important topics that will get you a job that pays your bills. Somebody needs to ask questions. UT and Texas A&M are not as crazy as my alma mater. Now, when I say not as crazy, I'm not making a value judgment. I'm just saying they're not as bad. So number one, when we talk affordability, somebody's got to ask about where the hell the money goes. Now, let me go to the second part, then ask you. When I went to Michigan out of state, even though I was an athlete, I was a swimmer. Swimmers don't get a lot of scholarships. So I figured it's the middle of the Vietnam War, and they're from 66 to 70. What the heck? They're offering ROTC scholarships. Well, hell, I'm male, I'm healthy, You know where I'm going right after I get out of college. It's the middle of Vietnam. So I said, okay, I'll take an ROTC scholarship. Worked great. I graduated from Michigan, out-of-state student with $1,500 worth of debt. Okay? Now coming back to this, I've had this discussion with some young people, and they go, well, I don't really want to owe anybody anything. And you're going, well, let's see, you're going to borrow $75,000 rather than serve 2 years in the Army. But it isn't just the ROTC scholarship. I mean, Illinois, when I was there, had this great National Guard scholarship. And it was really great. I won't get into it right now, but all these ones were. And too many kids don't accept the fact if you'd like someone to give you some money, you need to do something. Now, I'm picking the military as a good example, but there are a lot of other examples of programs like that that we really should stress. If you want a trained workforce, as several of these questions have talked about, maybe you should put into a scholarship. I mean, the military's putting up the money. Well, of course, the military, that's you and me and our wallets, but it's still the point. We're getting something for that money. We should stress the issue to students, two things. Number one, if you're going to be in debt, why don't you be in debt to something that gets you a job? And people can argue about the Army, but the largest training institution in the world is the United States military. The largest number of tech training, or largest number of people trained in technology fields are in the U.S. military. You can't be a field grade officer unless you have a master's degree in the civilian world. So it's not like we're asking idiots to be idiots. We're asking people who don't know much to get an education and do something to earn it. Two concepts. Where's the money going? And you can earn some money, a scholarship, military being an example.
Easy question.
Can I just say, as a Notre Dame grad, I'd love to say something critical about the University of Michigan. And so just one thing thrown out there is, because you mentioned out of state. So now University of Michigan, Michigan State, those kind of universities are like 50% out of state. Purdue's more than 30% out of state. Our Texas, that's something you don't see at our Texas universities, but nationally the trend has been to shift away from that focus on serving the state and serving more out-of-state students. That's one of the reasons that University of Michigan is doing that, is they're become dependent on that out-of-state tuition. Now, I'll also say this: the University of Michigan is right now probably the finest public university in the United States, and we're still the envy of the world in terms of our research and development infrastructure. So places like Michigan and Berkeley, MIT, and Harvard, University of Texas, A&M, Rice. These are. I would argue that we want to make sure that that we're not. We want to cut off the branch we're sitting on here. So on one hand, like if these great research universities were really a threat to American competitiveness, then our adversaries would be funding them, as opposed to right now racing to build their own research university infrastructure. So we want to make sure that we bolster our research and development infrastructure, and that's really going to be important for the competitiveness of Texas and the competitiveness of the United States. But I think it's a fair question to pose, like how much is going into either the research mission or the educational mission, as opposed to kind of administrative overhead and those kinds of things.
Real quickly on your, where's the money going? I've been studying this very intensively for a long time, and what I've noticed is that this is really a game of whack-a-mole. So on a particular campus, there's some scandal where there's way too many administrators doing this, so they institute rules. But what you never see is the total spending going down at that university. So even if you suppress spending over here, it'll just pop up somewhere else. And finally, I stumbled across what I think is the best explanation for this. So there was an economist by the name of Howard Bowen. He wrote a book back in 1980. It was like the economics of higher education. And if you don't want to read the whole book, you can basically remember like the Cliff's Notes, which is that universities are going to raise all the money they can. They're going to spend all they raise, and the combined effect of that is towards ever increasing expenditures. And so, Yeah, well, exactly, yes. And that was the point, which is that higher education is primarily public and private, nonprofit institutions. And what that means is that they're pursuing a mission, whether it's to educate the people of Texas, whether it's to, pursue science understanding. And so they will adapt to any budget you give them. You could multiply their budget by 100, and once they have enough time to hire folks, they'll spend it all. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Give me a hand in thanking our panelists for talking with us.